She had waited for this day her whole life. The white dress, the flowers, the promise of forever. To everyone who watched her walk down that aisle, Lena Carter was the perfect bride. Her smile glowed like sunlight, her steps were graceful, and her eyes shimmered with the reflection of a love story that seemed pure and true. But behind that smile hid a truth so dark, so devastating, that it would destroy every person it touched. On the very night she said, "I do," Lena was already carrying another man's child, and that man was her husband's brother. It began long before the wedding, long before vows, rings, or promises. Lena never imagined herself capable of betrayal. She was gentle, quiet, and faithful to a fault. Daniel, the man she was marrying, adored her completely. He saw her as the symbol of goodness, someone who could bring peace into his chaotic world. But love, as it turns out, can be tested in ways that break even the strongest hearts. Lena's mistake started as comfort, a moment of weakness disguised as kindness. Daniel's younger brother, Ethan, had always been close to the family. He was charming and carefree, but troubled. Where Daniel was steady, Ethan was wild. And sometimes, the wild has a way of pulling people into its storm. It was during the months when Daniel was working long hours to save for their wedding. Lena spent many evenings alone, planning, organizing, trying to make everything perfect. Ethan often stopped by, helping with errands, sharing stories, making her laugh when she felt overwhelmed. He was Daniel's brother, safe company, or so she thought. Until one night, boundaries blurred. It was late, emotions were raw, and loneliness became a dangerous door left open. What happened that night would haunt Lena forever. She told herself it was a mistake. She told herself it could never happen again, and she swore she would take the secret to her grave. But weeks later, she began to feel it. The morning sickness, the fatigue, the subtle changes her body could no longer hide. A test confirmed it. She was pregnant. And she knew instantly. The child was not Daniel's. From that moment, her life became a prison of guilt. Every time Daniel smiled at her, she felt the weight of what she'd done pressing harder on her chest. She thought about ending the pregnancy, about running away, about confessing everything. But each time she tried, fear silenced her. Fear of destroying Daniel. Fear of tearing apart a family that had given her everything. So she made a choice. A desperate, selfish choice. To keep the secret and move forward with the wedding. She told herself it was for love, for protection, for peace. But deep down, she knew it was for survival. To understand the depth of her fear, you have to understand the man she was marrying. Because Daniel Carter wasn't just a husband. He was a man who had already been broken once before. Long before Lena came into his life, Daniel was known for being dependable, the kind of man who showed up for everyone, even when no one showed up for him. He'd been through heartbreak once. Years earlier, he'd been engaged to another woman, someone he thought was his forever. That relationship ended abruptly when she left him for someone else, leaving behind a note that said she couldn't handle the simplicity of his life. It nearly destroyed him. For years after Daniel shut himself off from love, he poured himself into work, helping raise Ethan, taking care of their widowed mother, building a quiet, disciplined life. He didn't chase excitement. He craved peace. And when he met Lena, soft-spoken, kind, and full of warmth, it felt like God had finally given him a second chance. They met at church during a Sunday community drive. Lena was helping distribute food to the needy when Daniel offered to carry a heavy box for her. Their eyes met, and from that simple act, something grew. They began talking, volunteering together, praying together. In Lena, Daniel saw light. In Daniel, Lena saw stability, a man who could anchor her soul. Their relationship moved slowly, intentionally. Daniel was patient, respectful, almost old-fashioned in his love. He wrote her letters. He called her every night before bed. He brought her flowers just to see her smile. Everyone who saw them together believed they were meant to be. But Daniel carried one deep fear, the fear of betrayal. He never spoke about it openly, but it haunted him. He'd lost faith in love once. He believed that loyalty was sacred, that trust was everything. That's why when he fell in love with Lena, he fell completely. To him, she was the proof that love could be pure again. And that's what makes what happened next so devastating. Because while Daniel believed he had finally found peace, Lena was silently falling apart. Every kiss, every conversation, every wedding plan felt like another step deeper into a lie she couldn't escape. She wanted to confess so many times, but every time Daniel looked at her with that gentle smile, she couldn't bring herself to destroy him again. So she hid the truth. She put on the dress, said the vows, and promised forever, even as her heart screamed in guilt. To the world they were perfect. To their families they were a symbol of love and faith. But behind the smiles, a storm was already forming, one that would soon turn their marriage, their family, and their lives into headlines no one would ever forget. And when that storm finally broke, it would reveal just how fragile love can be, and how far a man will go when everything he's built is ripped away in one night.
She put on the dress, said the vows, and promised forever, even as her heart screamed in guilt. The applause, the laughter, the cheers of family and friends, they drowned out the storm raging inside her. To the world, Lena Carter had just become the luckiest woman alive. To Daniel, she was his answered prayer. The one woman who had turned his years of loneliness into meaning. But to herself, Lena felt like a thief, stealing a dream she no longer deserved. Daniel and Lena's story had always seemed like something out of a romance novel. They met 3 years earlier, in the quiet corner of a local bookstore. Daniel had come in searching for a gift for his mother. Lena worked there part-time while studying art. Their first conversation wasn't about love. It was about books, small talk, and laughter that came too easily. Daniel was drawn to her calmness, her soft-spoken nature, and the way she seemed to understand silence without fear. At the time, Daniel had just come out of a painful breakup. His last relationship had left him guarded, mistrustful, unsure of what real love meant anymore. He had built walls, tall, silent, impenetrable. But Lena, without even trying, found her way through them. Her kindness disarmed him. Her patience softened him. And before long, the man who once swore he'd never fall again was planning a future around her smile. They dated for 2 years, carefully, deliberately. Daniel wanted things done right this time. No games, no rush, no heartbreak. He saw in Lena what his heart had always longed for: stability. Someone who didn't need to be impressed, someone who loved quietly but deeply. She was gentle in her affection, devoted in her care, and Daniel trusted her completely. Everyone said they were perfect together. His friends admired her grace, his family adored her, and his younger brother Ethan, well, he admired her too, though for reasons no one else would ever suspect. Ethan had always been the opposite of Daniel. He lived fast, loved recklessly, and never thought twice before chasing temptation. But underneath the charm and mischief, he carried envy. Envy of Daniel's discipline, his success, his calm control over life. Lena noticed Ethan's warmth the way one notices a flame, beautiful from afar, dangerous up close. To her, he was family, a younger brother-in-law she never had. To him, she was the one thing he couldn't have, and that made her irresistible. The months before the wedding were a blur of joy and exhaustion. Daniel worked long nights, taking extra shifts to pay for the venue, the catering, the honeymoon. He wanted everything to be perfect for Lena. Meanwhile, she spent her days surrounded by color swatches, guest lists, and bridal fittings, all while hiding the secret that threatened to destroy it all. When Daniel came home late, exhausted, she greeted him with a smile that felt heavier each day. He saw devotion in her eyes. She saw guilt in her reflection. And each time he kissed her goodnight, she wondered how much longer she could keep pretending. Daniel was a man who believed in signs, the kind who thought fate rewarded honesty and punished betrayal. He used to tell Lena that truth was the foundation of everything good in life. Those words echoed in her mind every time she lied about being fine, every time she touched her stomach and felt the weight of a child that wasn't his. And yet, she loved him. That was the cruelest part of all. She truly loved him. Every gesture, every small act of kindness, every sacrifice he made for her, they deepened her shame. She wished she could undo what had happened with Ethan. She wished that one night of weakness could vanish from time. But fate, as she was learning, doesn't erase. It exposes. As the wedding reception ended and guests began to leave, Daniel held her close and whispered, "We did it, Lena. Our forever starts tonight." His voice was steady, filled with pride. Hers trembled as she replied, "Yes, forever." In that moment, she made another silent promise that no one would ever know. Not Ethan, not Daniel, not anyone. The secret would stay buried, and she would dedicate her life to making it right. But secrets have a way of growing. They breathe in silence, thrive in guilt, and sooner or later, they demand to be heard. Lena didn't know it yet, but the lie she carried inside her wasn't just a burden. It was a ticking clock. And when it finally went off, it wouldn't just destroy her marriage, it would destroy the Carter family forever. Daniel, unaware of the shadow that hovered over his new life, spent the first few months of marriage blissfully blind. He planned surprises, cooked dinner, and told everyone how lucky he was. He had no idea that every kind word, every gentle touch, was breaking Lena a little more inside. Because love built on deception can only stand for so long. And when truth begins to rise, even the most beautiful love story starts to crack. It was only a matter of time before Daniel would discover the one thing he could never forgive.
The honeymoon phase passed quickly, as all perfect illusions do. For Daniel and Lena, the early weeks of marriage were filled with laughter, morning coffee, and the quiet joy of waking up next to someone you love. They decorated their new home together, talked about the future, and shared dreams about starting a family someday. To Daniel, everything felt exactly as it should: peaceful, steady, right. But to Lena, every passing day felt like walking on thin ice. The secret she carried grew heavier as her body began to change. At first, it was subtle, a faint nausea in the mornings, small waves of dizziness she blamed on exhaustion. Daniel noticed, of course. He was attentive like that. "Are you okay?" he'd ask with concern. Lena would smile faintly and whisper, "Just tired." And Daniel, trusting as always, believed her. Weeks turned into months. The pregnancy had danced quietly, hidden beneath loose dresses and careful excuses. Lena prayed each night for a miracle, for some way out of the mess she'd made, for forgiveness she couldn't yet earn. She wanted to tell him. So many nights she rehearsed the words in her mind. "Daniel, there's something you need to know." But then she'd see his face, the same face that once looked at her like she was the safest place in the world, and the words would die on her lips. Meanwhile, Daniel's world was full of hope. He had started a small business with Ethan, a home renovation company that was slowly gaining clients. The brothers were closer than ever, bonded by trust, laughter, and shared ambition. Ethan's creativity, Daniel envied his natural charm. He often said, "I'm lucky to have both of you, my brother and my wife, in my corner." Those words, meant as gratitude, sliced through Lena's heart like a blade. Because every time Ethan came around, she felt the air grow heavier. Their eyes would meet for a moment too long, their silence filled with the memory of that one unforgivable night. Ethan had changed since then. Quieter, guilt-ridden, avoiding eye contact when Daniel wasn't looking. He had promised never to say a word, but Lena believed him. But the tension between them was a living thing, lurking just beneath the surface. Daniel began to sense something, a shift he couldn't quite define. Lena seemed distant at times, lost in thought even during their happiest moments. She flinched at his touch now and then, pulled away when he got too close. At first he brushed it off as nerves or maybe exhaustion, but as days turned into weeks, the feeling grew. That cold, nagging intuition that something wasn't right. Daniel wasn't a man who jumped to conclusions. He believed in reason, in communication, in giving the benefit of the doubt. But late at night, when Lena would fall asleep beside him, he'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what was wrong. He noticed the faint sadness in her eyes, the way she smiled less, the way she avoided certain topics, especially anything about children. And then one evening she came home later than usual, pale and shaken. When he asked where she'd been, she mumbled something about errands and rushed into the bathroom. Inside, Lena was falling apart. The guilt was consuming her faster than she could hide it. She knew the secret couldn't stay buried much longer. Her body was changing faster now, and soon no amount of loose clothing could disguise the truth. Each morning, she watched Daniel leave for work and wondered if this would be the day he found out. But Daniel's mind was elsewhere. His business was struggling, finances were tighter than he'd admitted. He didn't want to worry her, so he smiled through the stress. All he wanted was to give her a stable, happy life. He had no idea the woman he was trying to protect was protecting him from a truth that would shatter him completely. Then came the first real crack. One morning, Lena fainted in the kitchen. Daniel rushed to her side, panic flooding his voice as he carried her to the couch. She woke moments later, disoriented and pale. He insisted they go to the hospital, but she refused, desperate to avoid any medical attention that might reveal her secret. "It's just stress," she whispered. "I'm fine, Daniel, please." He hesitated, but relented, trusting her again, even when his instincts screamed otherwise. That evening, as she rested, Daniel sat outside alone, the worry twisting inside him. He thought about how much she'd changed since the wedding. The distance, the secrets, the shadows behind her smile. He told himself marriage had its rough patches, that love meant patience and faith, but something in his gut refused to quiet down. In the weeks that followed, Lena withdrew even more. She spent long hours alone, barely eating, barely speaking. Her guilt had become unbearable. She could no longer look at Daniel without seeing Ethan's face flash in her mind. And Ethan, too, was unraveling, avoiding family dinners, finding excuses not to visit, terrified that one look between them would give everything away. Daniel noticed, and that's when suspicion began to bloom. Subtle at first, a passing glance, a shift in tone, a strange tension between the two people he loved most. He couldn't explain it, but he could feel it. It was in the air, like static before a storm. One evening, as Lena cleared the dinner table, Daniel asked softly, "Did something happen between you and Ethan?" Her hands froze mid-motion. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Then she forced a laugh, too quick, too nervous. "What? Of course not, Daniel. Why would you even ask that?" He smiled faintly, but his eyes didn't. "I don't know. Just a feeling." That night, Lena cried herself to sleep beside him. And Daniel lay awake again, silent, watchful, wondering if the woman he loved had just lied to his face. He didn't know it yet, but the truth was already on its way.
For weeks, Daniel tried to silence his doubts. He told himself that love demanded trust, that marriage meant believing, even when things didn't make sense. But deep down, a voice kept whispering that something was terribly wrong. He noticed Helena avoided family gatherings, especially when Ethan was around. She'd find excuses, headaches, errands, exhaustion. When she did attend, she barely met Ethan's eyes. And Ethan, once lively and talkative, had become quiet and uneasy, barely able to stand in the same room as her. To everyone else, it looked like tension. To Daniel, it felt like betrayal waiting to be named. The breaking point began one rainy afternoon. Daniel came home earlier than usual, soaked from a sudden downpour. He expected to find Lena in the kitchen or working on her art. Instead, he heard soft sobs from their bedroom. He walked quietly toward the sound, and there she was, sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching something in her hands, a small white envelope. She didn't notice him at first. Her head was bowed, her body trembling, her whisper barely audible. "God, what have I done?" When Daniel finally spoke, his voice broke the silence like glass. "Lena? What's going on?" She froze. The envelope slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. He picked it up before she could stop him. Inside was a folded paper. A doctor's report. Pregnancy confirmation. Daniel's hands trembled as he read the date. His eyes darted up to hers. "You're pregnant." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. In that moment, Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. At first, it was disbelief, then shock, then joy, fleeting, fragile joy. He reached for her hand, smiling through the confusion. "Why didn't you tell me? Lena, this is amazing." But she pulled her hand away, her face pale, her eyes wet with fear. Daniel's smile faded. "What's wrong?" There was no answer, only silence, heavy, suffocating silence. And in that silence he saw it, the truth she'd been hiding for months. It was there in her eyes, in the way her breath shook, in the guilt written across her face. He didn't need her to say it, not yet. He already knew. "Is it mine?" The question hung in the air, sharp and cold. Lena's tears fell before words could. Daniel took a step back, as though distance could save him from the pain already sinking in. "Please, Daniel." "Whose is it?" Her silence was the answer. He turned away, pacing, his mind spinning out of control. "No, no, Lena, you wouldn't. You couldn't." He stopped suddenly, his voice breaking into a whisper of horror. "It's Ethan, isn't it?" Lena fell to her knees, sobbing. She didn't deny it. She didn't have to. The truth had already bled into the room like poison. Daniel's chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. His world, every memory, every moment, every promise collapsed in an instant. The woman he loved had carried another man's child. His own brother's child. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. It was as if his heart had turned to stone inside his chest. Lena reached for him, desperate, trembling. "Daniel, please! I never meant for this to happen. I love you. I swear I love you." He pulled away, his voice trembling with rage and disbelief. Don't say that word. You don't know what love means." She cried harder. "It was a mistake. It was one night. I was planning the wedding, doing everything alone, and Ethan, he—" "Don't." Daniel's hand shot up, silencing her. "Don't you dare blame him for this. Don't you dare make excuses for betrayal." The room fell silent except for her cries. Rain beat against the window, thunder echoing in the distance, as if the sky itself had joined the argument. Daniel stood by the window, staring out, his reflection barely recognizable. "I trusted you. I gave you everything I had." Lena crawled closer, clutching at his hand, desperate for him to look at her. "Please, Daniel, please. I'll do anything. Just don't leave me." He looked down at her, the woman he had once called his peace, and saw only the wreckage of everything he'd believed in. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "You should have told me the truth before you said those vows." He pulled his hand away and walked out. Not a word more, not a backward glance. Lena sat on the floor, her body shaking, her tears blurring everything. For a moment she thought about running after him. But how do you chase someone whose heart you've broken beyond repair? Outside, Daniel drove aimlessly through the rain, his thoughts spiraling into darkness. He replayed every memory, every smile, every kiss, every tender moment, and realized that each one had been built on a lie. He thought about Ethan, about the betrayal that ran deeper than blood. Two people he loved most had destroyed him in one single truth. By the time he returned home that night, something inside Daniel had changed. The kind man was gone. What remained was something cold, quiet, and broken beyond recognition. He didn't yell again. He didn't cry. He simply moved through the house like a ghost, packing a small bag, taking his keys, leaving without another word. And from that night on, nothing would ever be the same again. Because some betrayals don't just break hearts. They awaken something darker. And in Daniel's silence, the darkness had begun to grow.
After that night, Daniel Carter ceased to exist in the way people once knew him. The man who had loved with his whole heart, who smiled easily and forgave quickly, vanished without a trace. What remained was someone quieter, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. Grief didn't break Daniel, it transformed him. He moved out of the house the next morning without a word, no shouting, no closure, no final goodbye. Lena woke up to an empty closet, an untouched breakfast plate, and silence so deep it rang in her ears. Daniel had left his wedding ring on the table, beside it a note with just 3 words. "You killed us." Days turned into weeks. He didn't answer her calls, didn't respond to her messages, didn't show up to family gatherings. Even Ethan tried reaching him, but Daniel's silence was absolute. He had become a shadow, moving through life with mechanical precision, burying himself in work, avoiding everyone who once knew him. But silence can be deceptive, because behind that calm exterior, something was festering. Not rage, not yet, but calculation. A slow, deliberate hunger for justice or perhaps revenge. Lena tried to go on with her life, but guilt doesn't let go easily. Every mirror reflected a stranger, every memory replayed like a cruel film she couldn't stop watching. She stopped painting, stopped eating, stopped smiling. The once bright woman who dreamed of love and family had turned into a ghost of her own making. The pregnancy advanced. Every heartbeat inside her reminded her of what she'd done. She tried to convince herself the child was innocent, that maybe love could still find a way to heal what had been broken. But deep down, she feared one truth above all, that Daniel wasn't done with her yet. Because he hadn't said goodbye, and Daniel was not the kind of man to leave things unfinished. Months passed, and then one quiet afternoon, he returned, unannounced, unexpected, standing at her door like a storm that had finally found its target. Lena froze when she saw him. His face was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that hides something far worse than anger. "Daniel," she whispered, barely breathing. He simply looked at her, his eyes scanning her from head to toe, pausing on her swollen belly. "So it's true," he said softly. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "It's not what you think." "I think it's exactly what I think." He walked past her into the living room, every movement slow and deliberate. Lena followed, trembling. He sat down, folded his hands, and said, "Tell me something, Lena. Did you ever love me? Even once?" She broke down instantly. "Yes, Daniel, I did. I still do. I made a terrible mistake, but I love you. Please believe that." He smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "That's the problem with lies. You start to believe them yourself." She tried to explain, to justify, to beg, but he didn't raise his voice once. Instead, he listened in silence, studying her as if she were a puzzle he had already solved. When she finally ran out of words, he stood up and walked toward the door. "Daniel, please!" she cried, reaching out. He turned to her, his eyes colder than she'd ever seen. "You destroyed my heart, Lena. Now I'm going to return the favor. Not with rage, not with violence, but with truth." That was the day Daniel decided that if his life was ruined, theirs would be too. He started with Ethan. It wasn't hard to find him. Guilt had already made him reckless. Ethan was drinking heavily, skipping work, spiraling into the same chaos he'd always lived in. When Daniel showed up at his apartment, Ethan didn't even look surprised. He looked ashamed. "Daniel, I wanted to tell you." "I know, but you didn't." Ethan's voice cracked. "It was a mistake, I swear to God." "Stop. You don't get to swear on anything sacred. Not after what you did." There was no yelling, no fight. Just a quiet conversation between two brothers whose bond had died the night Betrayal was born. When Daniel left, Ethan collapsed, realizing that some forgiveness would never come. And Daniel? He didn't feel better. Revenge never gives peace. It only feeds the void. But still, he couldn't stop. He told their parents. The truth spread like wildfire through the Carter family. Shock turned into disgust. Pity turned into judgment. Lena's reputation was shredded overnight. Ethan disappeared from town soon after. And Lena? She lived through the humiliation, the whispers, the cold stares. Everywhere she went, she saw faces that once smiled now turn away. She tried reaching Daniel again, desperate to explain, desperate for a second chance, but every message went unanswered. He had exiled her from his life completely. Until the day she gave birth. It was a rainy evening, eerily similar to the night Daniel left her. The baby was born healthy, innocent, untouched by the sins that created him. Lena held him close, crying softly, whispering apologies to a child who didn't understand. And then, just as she was about to close her eyes, she saw a figure standing in the hospital hallway. Daniel. He stood behind the glass, motionless, watching. Their eyes met, hers full of hope, his empty and unreadable. He didn't enter the room, didn't say a word. After a long moment, he simply turned and walked away. That was the last time Lena ever saw him. But his silence would haunt her forever, because Daniel hadn't forgiven her. And sometimes the quietest revenge is the one that leaves you living, with the memory of what you've lost and the ghost of what you destroyed.
In the end, Lena learned the cruelest truth of all. Secrets don't die with you. They live in the hearts of those you leave behind. And for the rest of her life, every time her son smiled, she saw the price of her silence. Because sometimes the worst crimes aren't the ones committed with weapons, they're the ones committed with love. This was the story of a love that turned into a curse, a reminder that even the smallest lie can grow into a tragedy no one can escape. What would you have done if you were Lena? Would you have confessed the truth or carried it to the grave? If you believe every secret eventually finds its way to light, subscribe to Crime Vault for more real-life stories that reveal the dark side of love, trust, and betrayal. Because here, every truth leaves a scar. Subscribe now and don't miss the next heartbreaking story.